It's really important to make people economically viable, but it also is really important to make people humane. And that is where our biggest problems are sitting right now. We are forgetting to be humane towards other people. And I think the arts and humanities teach us how to be human. And that's the most important thing, I think.
Hello, it's Tank Talks Asia. I'm Manisha Tank. A very warm welcome from me and the team here at the Asia Works studios. Here's a question. Have you ever wondered what our world would look like without art? No cave paintings, no temples, no songs passed down through generations. Would we even be human without it? Or just highly efficient machines? Art doesn't reflect civilization, it creates it. Today on the show, we talk to award-winning Pakistani American artist Anila Quayyum Agha, whose thought-provoking pieces explore intersections between gender, cultural identity, and belonging. Her work forces us to look hard truths in the eye. Anila has experienced exclusion as a woman, as a Muslim, as an immigrant, but also she has succeeded spectacularly in the very systems she critiques. Anila, welcome to Tank Talks Asia. I'm so glad you're here. We're very, very lucky to have you.
Thank you so much.
So you are in Singapore, which is a special treat for us because
you're me too.
You're based in the United States, right? Whereabouts?
I live in the Midwest in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's about 2.5 hours south of Chicago.
You are exhibiting at the Sundaram Tagore Gallery. And I know that there's one in New York. There's also one in Singapore. I was lucky enough to see a bit of your work. And it is so thought-provoking. It's so moving. What are the ideas and the concepts at the root of your work?
I would say right away that there are 4 through lines that I have consistently worked through in all of the work that I've made in the last 30 years. The first would be about identity and where I come from, meaning that I come from South Asia, and that was a very important element as an educational point of view. The second thing would be that I am very concerned about the labor-intensive nature of women's work and minorities, and often they're undervalued. So craft work or work that is considered feminist or feminine is often very labor intensive, and that's very much part of my work. The third thing would be that I use materials often attributed to women, like embroideries and beading and stuff like that, paper or fabric or pattern, for example. And then the last thing that has become very, very important for me is the environmental concerns that I feel are human rights issues at heart. And if they're human rights, then that means it's women's rights at risk. And so I think that that's how broad strokes explain my work.
And what's interesting about that is these are issues that hit everyone. So it doesn't matter whether you're sitting in Lahore in Pakistan or you're sitting in the Midwest of the United States of America. These are universal issues.
Exactly. I think so strongly because, often artists who may come from a different place and come to Europe or the US, they're encouraged to disparage their own cultures so that they can make work that is more Euro-Western view. And I resisted that. I was not okay with it. I don't think that I can disparage Pakistan in any way because I feel like what happens in Pakistan also happens in America. Discrimination towards women and minorities happens in Pakistan, but it also happens in the US. And so I think that I did not believe in disparaging my own culture. I believed in trying to create a situation where I could cross the boundaries or inform people where I come from and how beautiful it can be if we allow everybody to be part of the conversation rather than be exclusive. I think my work is about inclusivity.
Yes, it's remarkable how an installation or a piece of artwork can represent so many words in just one flash frame.
I think images worldwide often can say more than words can sometimes, right? As a woman growing up in Pakistan, I was supposed to be very decorous and quiet and have lots of children. right? So the work initially attracts you as a very beautiful ornamental object. But then it has multiple layers to it. So once you're inside that space, you are confronted by multiple things. And I'm talking about one of my larger pieces. It's the shape of a cube. It's very still. It's levitating above the ground. It's got pattern on all six sides. And there's a light inside. And it casts shadows all around. So if there's no obstruction, the light is going to travel as far as possible, right? So there are some things that happen. For instance, the gallery space actually becomes the artwork. There's an art inside, but there's also the gallery walls that restrict the light to move forward.
Right.
That in itself becomes an artwork. And anybody who's walking through it
Is part of...
becomes part of it.
Yeah.
So it becomes itinerant. And it's a movement oriented, even though it's stationary and it's levitating, meaning that it's hung higher, it still carries that movement that is created by the people, the audience members that are inside.
So was this your award-winning piece?
Yes. Well, the first cube that I built was the award-winning cube. And then, of course, one gets a reputation and then everybody wants it.
Right. Yes.
I do other things. I'd like to make that as a point that I make a lot of different types of works. But there are some other things that I'd like to, there's a contradiction that happens within that work. It's made out of steel. It's extremely heavy, yet it looks fragile because it's got cutouts all over it.
Yes.
So it talks about light and dark, life and death. I remember the first time I was taking it to a museum to exhibit it for a competition. We installed it and the light hadn't been turned on inside. And I was a little scared because the room was 44 foot square.
Right.
I don't know how much that would be in meters, but and 16 feet tall. And the cube looked really tiny in there. And then the moment we turned on the light,
It transformed the space.
voila. Yeah, it just became like this amazing space. And I kind of saw what the looks on the people who were installing with us, the curator's face, the director's face. I mean, there was an instant recognition of something that was amazing and life-changing.
So this is the thing about art. I mean, just you describing it gets me thinking. We're living in a world where there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation, but there is a truth about art that we can never be misinformed when we see it in its purest form. Would you agree with that? And is that a reason to need more art in the world?
I think a lot of times architects or engineers or business people who are kind of creating a building or something like that, they often forget to ask the artists to sit at the table right at the start. And they often ask them to come at the end when the budgets become really tiny. And then you see the options of making something really small rather than getting them to sit right beside you to decide, like, what can we do? It's a moment of truth right then and there. You kind of get to decide what could be possible. You know, I mean, like, it can heal, it can create awe in people, it can bring communities together, it can do so many multiple things. Like, color can really change people's lives. And so I think there's a dearth of understanding on inviting people who are part of the arts and humanities to the table right at the start.
I want to talk about a bit of that, but I also want to rewind for a moment because I want to go back to you as a girl growing up in Pakistan. I've read that some of your experiences in Pakistan as a young girl, you've already mentioned the way you were expected to behave, what you were expected to do. But what about artistic influence? Growing up in amongst South Asian art, Islamic art in particular, what influence did that have on you?
Let me back up a little. I grew up without really having any artists in my family. I didn't really. My father was very accomplished at drawing, but he was an engineer, and he would, as a hobby, make other people's architectural home drawings for them, and then they would not pay him and go and build their homes the way he designed them. My mother was also very facile at drawing, and she would entertain us with birds and, bees and stuff that she would draw. But other than that, there was really no concept of a woman becoming an artist. And I think that is synonymous with most cultures around the world where women were often considered not necessarily artistic material. Craft material, yes, but artistic material, no. But then I actually enrolled myself in the art school without the permission of my family.
So where was the art school? This was in
Lahore. It was the only art school at the time. Now they have multiples, but it wasn't part of a university. It was an independent art school. It used to be called the Mayo Art School, and the British had set it up.
Right.
To sort of the colonial way of creating craft and then bringing it back to Europe so they could sell it and say, we started this. But, arts and crafts were part of Asia
for millennia.
for millennia. Here's the problem also that I faced when I was going to grad school in the US. Craft was considered less than fine art. But we grew up with craft like carpets and textiles. When I started grad school, I had this real issue with how they would bifurcate craft from art. And my tendency was to make things really well. I'd been taught to craft things really well. I still do. And that was considered bad. That was very feminine or, too crafty.
That's very frustrating to hear that. Very frustrating. And I'm sure it must have been frustrating for you as a young person.
Oh, yeah. Totally. The other thing that I was often encouraged to do was to look at Euro-Western artists and try to make work like them. And I realized as I started becoming more and more educated, I really read up on art history, European art history and American art history. And I realized that, that's not me.
Yeah.
I'm going to make what is right for me. And art has to be honest to oneself. Design, yeah, you can kind of use influences from different parts and kind of combine different things.
So how do you bring those influences to some of the pieces of yours that we can look at today?
So the Sundaram Tagore's show is titled The Unraveling. It sort of references the idea of how climate change is unraveling everything. And we are kind of before, there's a moment of, stillness before the storm hits. And to my mind, that is what we are at, that moment, the cusp of being blown away or kind of rectifying our pathway.
Or discovering something new about ourselves.
Yeah. So there's a cube in it that's titled Rainforest. There are multiple paintings that are collage, stitchwork, resined, that are figurative. There are a lot of abstract flat works, and there are larger pattern-oriented paintings that are also CNC carved and applied with resin, colored resin. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, so I kind of fit the material to what I'm trying to say with my work.
There is a perception that art has become very expensive. Expensive to produce, expensive to maintain a lifestyle on. But also we see this in the news all the time. It was often that famous art pieces reach the news because they've been in a Sotheby's auction and they've gone for hundreds of millions of dollars. Is that bothersome in any way? Do you sort of think, this takes us off on a tangent that we don't really want to be on? Or is there something there that we do need to talk about, particularly when it comes to financial means?
I really don't know how I can respond to that question because I'm not the one who's gaining tons of money. I'm making work and my prices are fairly affordable. I need to make a living so I can pay my mortgage and, make the next batch of work that I hope I am productive till I'm 90 or 100 if I live that long. But I want to be consistent and persistent and continue to produce even if, I want to be like Louis Bourgeois, to tell you honestly. I want to be like 95 and still making work. That can only happen if artists are also given the same kind of recompense that accountants get or teachers get.
Yes.
Why is it that artists have to starve just because they have to spend extraordinary amounts of time into making something? So I feel like, there are like Da Vinci's are sold for an extraordinary amounts of money.
And Da Vinci in his time never got to benefit from that, did he?
Well, he may have, because he was quite the polymath. So he had patronage.
He had many, yes, he did.
And nowadays, there are some people who do get patronage, but usually there are, the dominant culture, white men, who get a lot of attention, and then Black men, and then white women, and then women of color, and then queer artists.
There is a hierarchy,
yeah,
even in the art world.
Yeah, of course. Most definitely.
So how do we address that? And should we, obviously it should be addressed, but how do we do that? One would be tempted to say, well, you use art to be able to address that.
It's interesting that you ask me. Like the first time I made that big sculpture and I got into this competition and I got to show my work, the gallery space was often given over to 10 or 12 artists. And here a woman of color from South Asia is given the space for a single artwork. So in a sense, I did kind of cross over and I did make that shift. And hopefully that has helped other women to do that too.
Oh, how interesting. You also said to me off air that it was very exciting how many Asian artists there now are. Now, is that the case certainly in the United States?
I think women are having a heyday currently. Black artists are having a heyday currently, which is really lovely. I have seen some amazing work from African Americans, people of color, women of color. And it just makes you feel like, things are happening. Now, I just hope that it's not a fad or a blimp. I hope it continues. Lots of museums are trying to create equity in collections, because acquisitions are very low. I was reading some statistics some while back where they were talking about how long it would take for equity to really happen, for women to be collected by institutional support. And there was some discussion about it may take about 300 years.
300 years?
Yeah. Because,
Goodness.
see, men have been collected for the last 500 to 700 years. And so it may take us that long to have real equity in the museums.
That's not satisfactory
at all. So we need to start immediately. Like Art SG is starting a fund that is supposed to support new and upcoming artists. Maybe they should spend a lot of money to buy women artists and put them in the museum.
We can certainly pass on the suggestions, can't we? Okay, I have a couple more questions for you. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to ask you about what it's like living in America at the moment as a Muslim woman immigrant. Obviously, the United States of America is in the headlines a great deal at the moment. Your work is very much about the intersections in between culture. I felt it would be important that we talk about your feelings around what's going on at the moment and how people such as yourself in the art world can help with expression. Because there are a lot of people feeling like they can't really talk about how they feel at the moment. And that's where art plays a really big role.
I think that is a very true statement. And, people are so scared of losing opportunities. And actually, that happened 2 years ago. There was a Palestinian artist who had been selected to be given a retrospective at the institution that she had gone to school. And they pulled the plug on her. They'd already published the catalog, but they pulled the plug on her. I think her last name is Halabi. And her work wasn't overtly political at all. She was just Palestinian. So that made the university museum pull the plug on her. Mm-hmm. I think when we do things like that, when we take away the agency that universities have or museums have, institutions that are educational, and the minders of culture, they need to have the freedom to do what needs to be done without coercion.
I want to ask you a question about colour.
Okay.
So I years ago read a book about colour, and it was so enlightening. It went into the chemistry of different colours, where and how colours were mined for hundreds of years ago, how they influenced the Renaissance, how paint is made. I would love to get your steer on colour. What does it mean, and should we take it much more seriously?
I think, because I use very bold colors in my work. And the reason why I started doing that, initially I was quite pared down. The first 5, 7 years, I kind of had a very subdued palette. That may have been because of the grad school that I attended. Often there was this discussion about how cultures that are not Euro-Western, that have, if you look at their cities or the cities that are sort of like more westernized, it's chrome, black, glass,
Yes,
gray, mostly gray.
I know what you mean.
But cultures like Pakistan and India and Mexico and
So
places,
vibrant.
very vibrant.
Bright, yes.
And so I read this article some years ago, like maybe some 10 years ago, where they were talking about cultures that use colors that are vibrant are often not very sophisticated. And I have a tendency to be rebellious in my work. So I immediately said, I'll show you.
Using color and lots of it.
Yes, color has a great deal of impact on us. I think also one shouldn't forget that regions such as Pakistan or India, they're extremely hot.
Yes.
And the sun washes us out.
Yes.
That's why color
Had
is
to be
very
vibrant.
so that you can stand out. And in the desert or in hot regions, people would wear bright colors so they could be identified from a distance. So, people forget that there are other reasons also why color was very important in regions that are, maybe not America or Europe or something. I remember it came time to paint my house. And it was this whitish, grayish color.
Yes.
And so I decided to paint it bright red.
Bright red.
Bright red. And
That
there
sounds
are these beautiful benches in the front of the house that are made out of steel, and I wanted to do them in cobalt blue. And people would come around and take pictures and put it on Instagram because my house was the first house that was painted bright red in that neighborhood. And then now you go around and almost all the houses are nicely, brilliantly colored.
And with that, we're going to wrap up on one last question, which is really, as an artist, as someone who has so many layers of ideas about all of the big issues we should be thinking about, what's your big call to action, particularly for young people in this part of the world?
I think that, so many people, parents, especially Asian parents, they often suggest to their kids strongly that they should study sciences and STEM. I think that kids who get to read a novel or look at a picture or experience drawing something, it teaches you something about human nature. It teaches you persistence. It teaches you the levels of experimentation. It forces you to problem solve things independently. You have to put in that effort to improve your drawing skills. Not everybody is born with a certain type of talent, right? So you teach yourself to problem solve. And I think it makes you better rounded, much more humane individuals when you are able to listen to a poem or understand prose that may not come across, it teaches you humanity.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the thing that STEM often forgets. It's really important to make people economically viable, but it also is really important to make people humane. And that is where our biggest problems are sitting right now. We are forgetting to be humane towards other people. And I think the arts and humanities teach us how to be human. And that's the most important thing, I think.
What a beautiful place to finish. Thank
Truly
you.
that.
Anila, thank you so much for spending the time with us on Tank Talks Asia.
This was really lovely, and I really appreciate you making time for me.
That was such an interesting conversation. And off air, Anila talked to me about how when she went to America, she was alone. She didn't have family to support her. And the fact that many curators have given her so much encouragement and mentorship over the years. And we both talked about how important that is, particularly for women. I'm Manisha Tank from me and the rest of the team. Thank you so much for listening. And please don't forget to subscribe and follow Tank Talks Asia. That way you'll never miss an episode. Tank Talks Asia is an AsiaWorks production. And the views and opinions shared by our guests are their own.